Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. What happens when your nightmare neighbor's car is left abandoned in your parking spot for 35 days straight? After months of her stealing my spot, she just disappears, leaving her car behind. Was it an emergency, or was it a trap? I decided to find out by following a little-known law that would change everything. I've lived in my apartment complex for about 6 years now. It's one of those older buildings that got renovated and converted into condos, so each unit actually owns their parking spot individually. This becomes important later. The parking situation here is pretty straightforward. Each unit gets one assigned spot with their unit number painted on the ground in bright yellow paint. There's also visitor parking near the front entrance, which is clearly marked with signs explaining the 2-hour limit during weekdays. The whole setup works fine as long as everyone follows the basic rules and parks where they're supposed to. My spot is number 14, right next to the stairwell entrance. It's convenient because I can grab groceries and take them straight upstairs without walking across the entire lot. I've never had any issues with it until this woman moved into Unit 27 about 8 months ago. Let me tell you about this neighbor. She drove a beaten-up sedan that looked like it had been through several minor accidents without any repairs. The passenger side mirror was held on with duct tape, and there was a significant dent in the driver's side door. The car was also covered in a layer of grime that suggested it hadn't been washed in months, maybe years. The problem started small. She'd occasionally park in my spot when she had someone visiting, I guess assuming I wouldn't be home or wouldn't care. The first few times it happened, I'd find her car in my spot when I got home from work, forcing me to park in the visitor area and walk the extra distance. I left polite notes on her windshield asking her to use the visitor parking instead. She ignored them completely. After the 4th or 5th time, I knocked on her door to address it directly. She answered wearing pajamas at 3 in the afternoon, which should have been my first clue about her general approach to life. I explained the situation calmly, pointing out that I owned that spot and needed her to stop parking there. She looked at me like I was speaking another language, then said something about how she didn't think anyone would mind if she used it occasionally since her own spot was further from the stairs. I explained again that it wasn't occasionally, it was becoming a regular thing, and that I did mind very much since I owned the spot and paid for it as part of my condo. She promised she'd stop, but she didn't. In fact, it got worse. She started parking there even when she didn't have visitors. Sometimes I'd come home to find her car in my spot multiple days in a row. I'd have to hunt for parking elsewhere, either in visitor spots or on the street, which meant I was paying for a parking spot I couldn't use. I escalated to the property management company. They sent her warnings, but nothing changed. The management company explained that since parking spots were individually owned and not part of the common areas, they had limited enforcement power beyond sending letters. They suggested I contact a towing company, so I did exactly that. I called a local towing company and explained the situation. They said they could tow vehicles from private property with the owner's permission, which I had since I owned the spot. I gave them my contact information and told them they could tow any vehicle in spot 14 that wasn't my car. The next time she parked in my spot, I called the towing company. They came out within an hour and hauled her car away. I felt a little guilty about it, but also vindicated. Maybe this would finally get through to her. It didn't. She showed up at my door the next evening, absolutely furious. She screamed about how I had no right to tow her car, how it cost her over $200 to get it back, and how I was a terrible neighbor for not just talking to her first. I reminded her that I had talked to her multiple times, and that she'd been warned by management as well. She stormed off, yelling something about how I'd regret this. For about a week, she actually parked in her own spot. I thought maybe the towing had finally driven the message home. But then she started parking in my spot again, this time with a new twist. She'd leave angry notes on her own windshield preemptively. Things like, "Don't tow, moving in 5 minutes," or "Emergency, will move soon." Of course, the car would sit there for hours or even days with these notes. I had her towed 3 more times over the next month. Each time she'd rage about it, and each time she'd eventually park in my spot again. The property management company was sympathetic, but said there wasn't much more they could do. They'd sent multiple violation notices, but since she owned her unit, they couldn't exactly evict her. The next time I confronted her about it, she got really sarcastic with me. She said something like, "Oh, you want me out of your precious spot? Fine, then follow the proper legal process. Send me certified letters, do the whole formal thing. Otherwise, stop harassing me." She was clearly being condescending, like she thought I'd never actually go through with formal legal procedures. I just nodded and walked away. After the second towing, I'd actually installed a cheap security camera pointed at my spot. I bought it online for about $40 and mounted it on the stairwell wall where it could see my parking space. I did this mostly to have timestamps for the towing company, since they wanted proof of how long vehicles had been there. The camera saved footage to my phone, so I had a running record of who was parking in my spot and for how long. Then came the incident that changed everything. I was heading out for a work trip that would last about 2 weeks. It was a training seminar across the country that my company required for all senior staff. The day before I left, I noticed her car was in my spot again. I was running late for my flight and didn't have time to deal with getting it towed, so I just parked in visitor parking and figured I'd handle it when I got back. Here's where things get interesting. I was gone for just over 2 weeks, and when I returned, her car was still sitting in my spot. Same position, same everything. It had accumulated a thick layer of dust and pollen, plus someone had written "wash me" in the grime on the back window. The car looked completely abandoned. I was furious. Not only had she taken my spot while I was gone, but she'd apparently left the car sitting there the entire time I was away. I checked my security camera footage from my parking spot. The footage clearly showed her car being parked in my spot the day before I left for my trip. I checked the timestamp. It had been sitting there for exactly 16 days when I got back. I immediately called to have it towed, but this time I noticed something different. The car had a parking ticket on the windshield from the city, one of those tickets they give to vehicles that haven't been moved in over 72 hours on private property when reported as abandoned. I hadn't called the city about it, so someone else in the complex must have reported it as an abandoned vehicle. This gave me an idea. I remembered her sarcastic comment about following the proper legal process. Fine, I'd do exactly that, follow every single legal step for dealing with an abandoned vehicle on private property. She'd basically given me a roadmap of exactly what she thought I wouldn't have the patience to do. I started researching online what I could do about an abandoned car on private property. I went down a rabbit hole reading forums and state laws. Turns out there's actually a legal process for this. Something about vehicles left on private property for over a month being considered abandoned. The process looked complicated with certified letters and waiting periods, but it was all laid out pretty clearly on the DMV website. I checked with a few neighbors who I was friendly with, asking if they'd seen the woman from Unit 27. One of them mentioned she'd seen moving boxes outside the unit about 2 weeks ago and assumed she might have moved out without telling anyone. Another neighbor said he'd noticed the same thing. This was getting more interesting by the minute. I checked with the property management company, pretending I was concerned about a possibly abandoned unit. They confirmed that the woman was still the owner of record for Unit 27, but said they'd had difficulty reaching her recently. She was apparently behind on her HOA dues. I decided to document everything carefully. Instead of having her towed like I normally would, I took time-stamped photos every few days showing the car in the same position with increasing amounts of dirt and debris accumulating on it. I wanted to be absolutely certain I followed the law correctly. According to what I'd read, the car needed to be there for over 30 days before I could start the abandoned vehicle process. I parked in visitor parking during this time, which was annoying, but I figured it would be worth it if I could finally resolve this situation permanently. Days passed. The car sat there, collecting more dust, more pollen, and even some bird droppings. More parking tickets appeared on the windshield from the city. There were 3 total by the time I was ready to act. After the car had been sitting there for 35 days straight, I started the formal process. I went to the post office and sent a certified letter to Unit 27, informing the owner that their vehicle had been left on my private property for over a month and was considered abandoned under state law. I explained that they had 15 days to remove the vehicle or contact me to make arrangements, or I would proceed with having it removed and disposed of as an abandoned vehicle. I also posted a large notice on the vehicle's windshield with all the same information, along with my contact details and the date. I took photos of this notice on the car to document that I'd done it. Then I had to figure out the lien holder situation. I called a scrapyard to ask about the process, and the guy there told me I'd need to contact any lien holder on the vehicle. I didn't even know what that meant at first, but he explained it meant whoever had a loan on the car. He told me I could find that information through the VIN number if I contacted the DMV or looked it up through certain websites. After some digging, I found out there was a loan on the car through a local credit union. I sent them a certified letter as well, informing them that the vehicle was on my private property and appeared to be abandoned and that I was following the legal process to have it removed. I included the VIN number and asked them to contact me if they wanted to claim the vehicle. The 15 days passed with no response. The certified letters I'd sent to Unit 27 came back marked as unclaimed. The credit union did send me a response, though. They sent a letter saying they'd been trying to reach the borrower for months due to missed payments, and that they'd already written off the loan. They had no interest in recovering the vehicle since it was worth less than what was owed on it. The letter said something about me being free to dispose of it as I saw fit. This was the green light I needed. I contacted the same scrapyard I'd talked to before. The guy seemed hesitant at first. Apparently they get people trying to scrap cars they don't own all the time. But after looking through all my paperwork and making a couple phone calls to verify things, he said it looked legitimate. He mentioned he'd handled a few abandoned vehicle situations before, and mine had better documentation than most. He asked for all my paperwork, which I'd kept in a big envelope. Photos from my phone showing the car over time, the receipts from the certified letters, the letter from the credit union, copies of those parking tickets from the city, and a copy of my condo paperwork showing I owned the spot. The scrapyard offered me $200 in cash for the scrap value. He explained this would cover their cost of towing it away and processing it, with a little bit left over for me. I agreed immediately. Honestly, I would have paid them to take it away at that point, so getting money for it felt like a bonus. The next morning, a flatbed truck showed up and loaded the car. I watched from my apartment window as they hauled it away. Several neighbors came out to see what was happening, and I explained the situation to a few of them. Most were sympathetic, having seen the ongoing parking drama over the past months. I thought that would be the end of it. I had my parking spot back, the eyesore of a car was gone, and I'd followed all the legal procedures correctly. I even had $200 in cash in my wallet, figuring it was fair compensation for the months of hassle and the times I'd had to pay for alternate parking or walk extra distances with groceries. 2 weeks later, the woman showed up at my door again. This time she looked different, more haggard and stressed. She wasn't screaming, which was new. Instead, she asked very quietly where her car was. I explained that her vehicle had been abandoned on my private property for over 35 days, that I'd followed all legal procedures for disposing of an abandoned vehicle, and that it had been scrapped. I showed her copies of all the documentation, including the certified letters that had been returned as unclaimed. The color drained from her face. She said she'd been staying with family out of state due to a personal emergency and hadn't been checking her mail. She'd left the car in my spot because her own spot had some construction equipment in it temporarily, and she didn't think she'd be gone for more than a few days. I felt a tiny pang of sympathy, but then I remembered all the times before this when she'd parked in my spot with no valid excuse, all the times she'd ignored my polite requests and management warnings, all the money I'd spent on towing and alternative parking, and especially her sarcastic comment about following the proper legal process. I told her that while I was sorry for her situation, she'd established a pattern of parking in my spot without permission long before this incident, and that the vehicle met all legal criteria for abandonment. She tried to argue that I should have tried harder to contact her, but I pointed out that I'd sent certified mail to her unit, posted notices on the vehicle itself, and had no other contact information for her. The property management company hadn't been able to reach her either. She should have made arrangements for her vehicle before leaving for an extended period, especially since she'd been warned multiple times about parking in my spot. She threatened to sue me. I told her she was welcome to try, but that I'd followed all state laws regarding abandoned vehicles on private property, had documentation of everything, and had even gotten a letter from her credit union saying they'd written off the loan and had no interest in the vehicle. I suggested she speak with an attorney if she wanted, but that she'd likely be wasting her money. She left in tears. I did feel bad about that part, but also firmly believed I'd done nothing wrong. She'd created this situation through months of disrespecting clearly marked private property and ignoring multiple warnings through multiple channels. And she'd literally told me to follow the proper legal process, probably thinking I'd never actually do it. About a week later, I got a letter from an attorney representing her. It was a demand letter asking for compensation for the vehicle and claiming I'd improperly disposed of her property. I responded with a detailed timeline of events, copies of all my documentation, and a copy of the relevant state law regarding abandoned vehicles. I also included a log of all the previous incidents where she'd parked in my spot and been warned or towed, which I got from the towing company and the management company. A few weeks later, I got a short letter from the attorney saying that after reviewing the matter, they would not be pursuing any claims. It was very brief and formal, basically "we looked into it and you're right," without actually saying those words. That was the last I heard from either of them. I later heard from other neighbors that she'd indeed moved out permanently and was renting out her unit. The new tenant is lovely and has never once parked in my spot. In fact, she introduced herself when she moved in and specifically asked which spot was mine so she could make sure to avoid it. That's the kind of neighbor I'd hoped for from the beginning. The property management company actually thanked me in a roundabout way. Apparently, my documentation of the entire situation helped them establish better procedures for dealing with parking violations. They now include specific language in all owner agreements about abandoned vehicles and the consequences of repeatedly violating parking assignments. They mentioned in a newsletter that parking enforcement had been strengthened and violations were down significantly. Several months have passed since then, and I still have mixed feelings about the whole situation. On one hand, I technically cost someone their vehicle, even if it was a junker that was worth less than what she owed on it. On the other hand, I followed every legal procedure correctly, gave ample warning and opportunity for her to reclaim it, and only did so after months of her repeatedly disrespecting my property rights. The thing that makes me feel most justified was finding out later that the car hadn't just been sitting abandoned for those 35 days because of an unexpected emergency. According to another neighbor who I'm friendly with, the woman had actually come back briefly about a week into my trip. She saw that I wasn't home, and deliberately left her car in my spot while she went back to wherever she was staying. She apparently told this neighbor that she figured I was gone and wouldn't notice, so she might as well use the better parking spot since hers was temporarily blocked. That detail changed my entire perspective. It wasn't an innocent case of an emergency causing her to forget about her car. She'd actively made the choice to take advantage of my absence and dump her car in my spot, probably hoping I'd be gone long enough that it wouldn't matter. She'd gambled that she could get away with it one more time, and she lost. And the irony of the whole thing was that she'd literally told me to follow the proper legal process if I had a problem with her parking there, so that's exactly what I did. I've noticed that other residents in the complex have become much more respectful about parking since this incident. There used to be a few people who would casually park in other people's spots overnight or on weekends, but that's completely stopped. Word spreads fast in a condo complex, and apparently the story of the scrapped car has become something people talk about. The visitor parking area, which used to overflow into assigned spots regularly, is now respected much more carefully. The management company even repainted all the spot numbers and put up additional signs about towing and abandoned vehicle policies. The change has been noticeable. I sometimes wonder what happened to the woman. I know she moved out, but I don't know if she faced any other consequences from having her car scrapped. She was already behind on her car payments according to the credit union, so maybe it actually helped her by eliminating that debt, or maybe it made her situation worse. I'll never know, and honestly, I've stopped wondering about it. What I do know is that I followed the law, I gave fair warning, and I acted only after she'd established a clear pattern of disrespect for other people's property. Could I have been more generous? Maybe. Could I have given her more chances? Probably. But at what point does patience become enabling bad behavior? She'd been warned by me personally, by management, by towing companies, and by the city parking enforcement. She'd been given chance after chance to change her behavior. The car sat abandoned for over a month with multiple notices on it. She'd even sarcastically told me to follow the proper legal channels if I wanted her out of my spot. At some point, personal responsibility has to factor into the equation. The whole experience taught me something about standing up for yourself and your property rights. For years before this, I'd been the type to just let things go, to avoid confrontation, to assume that being nice would eventually work. This neighbor taught me that some people will take advantage of that kindness indefinitely if you let them. I'm not saying I've become a harsh person or that I go around looking for fights now, but I am more willing to enforce my boundaries and follow through when someone repeatedly violates them. I'm more willing to use the legal tools available to me when someone won't respond to polite requests or reasonable warnings. My parking spot is still number 14, still right next to the stairwell entrance, and still very convenient for carrying groceries. The difference now is that my car is always the one parked in it. No more coming home to find someone else's vehicle there, no more having to circle the lot looking for visitor parking. No more notes on windshields that get ignored. Just a spot with a freshly painted yellow number 14, where my car sits every night, exactly as it should be. And somewhere out there is a scrapyard that has the crushed remains of a beat-up sedan that learned the hard way that you should never park in someone else's spot, especially after you tell them to follow the proper legal process to do something about it. The next one is a pro-revenge story. For some reason, God knows why, I thought I'd trust a very small and local credit union with some of my money. When recently my card didn't work on the ATM, I asked for help inside the branch, and a clerk gave me a code to use that would deduct cash directly from my account. This is a feature the bank has. I wasn't having special treatment. Fast forward a few days, it seems the bank's system flagged my account for review because of some accounting error being late to deduct my balance. I didn't go on overdraft or anything, it was just a minor mistake from their side, and still, for over a month all my funds were locked, and whenever I'd call my bank's support I was given snarky responses, sometimes even hinting that they didn't like my foreign-sounding last name. When I spoke to my family back home to vent about this situation, a younger cousin came up with an idea. Use some Russian service that pays people a few Russian rubles. 1 rub is approximately 1 USD cent for reference, each time to post whatever you ask them on social media. This service worked like magic. The website even had the option to choose between American-looking profiles and other locales. After the most well-spent $3 of my life and some AI prompts later, the credit union's social media were flooded with hundreds of complaints. I'm sure this got to the right ears because on the same day, the bank's call center manager personally called me to say they understand my frustration, and even if I don't want my account anymore, the bank is ready to initialize a transfer of my full balance plus $50 compensation to any other bank of my choosing. Problem solved. They probably also realized there was no way to link this activity to me, and hence hinted at ending things on a positive note. Too bad I can't tell the Russian bots to remove their posts. That will be someone else's problem now. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I was 24, I got my first place of my own. I rented a townhouse. This was back in the late 1980s, when even poor people could apparently afford to rent an entire house. I was putting myself through college and did not have much money left over for anything unnecessary, but I was getting by. The townhouse was part of a row, so I had 2 neighbors whose homes were attached directly to mine. I got along fine with the neighbor on one side. By that I mean we said hello whenever we saw each other, and that was about it. The neighbor on the other side, whom I will call Bob, had a permanent chip on his shoulder. Whenever we crossed paths, I would say hi or good morning, and he would ignore me, scowl, or turn away. Whatever, it was not a big deal, and I simply took it in stride. As a struggling college student, I did not have much money for non-essential expenses. Most people in the neighborhood poured weed killer over their lawns every spring. I did not. There were several reasons for that. Most importantly, I thought it was a shame to dump poison into the local environment and water table. I like a nice lawn, but I do not believe every yard needs to consist of perfectly uniform grass. I prefer something more natural. Back then, that meant ordinary grass mixed with a little crabgrass and some dandelions. One day, Bob started berating me about the dandelions. They do not fit the neighborhood. Do you have no self-respect? You are bringing down the tone of the entire area. After that, every time he saw me, he told me I needed to pour poison on my lawn. I explained repeatedly that I could not afford to do that and did not want to anyway. At first, I remained polite because I wanted to maintain a decent relationship with my neighbors. But Bob became increasingly angry and unreasonable. Eventually, he started calling me poor white trash. One day, I came home from college with several friends in my car. As we parked in my driveway and began getting out, Bob stormed outside and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Get rid of those fucking dandelions!" Then he noticed my friends. He was clearly embarrassed that he had made a scene in front of them, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. He turned toward my friends and said, "Did you know your friend is an embarrassment to this neighborhood? How does it feel to be friends with white trash?" By then, I had endured enough of his anger. I told him to fuck off and mind his own business. Several days later, someone knocked on my front door. I opened it and found a municipal bylaw enforcement officer standing there. He explained that he was responding to a complaint about noxious weeds in my backyard and asked if he could inspect it. Because mine was the middle townhouse, the only way to reach the backyard was through the house. I invited him inside and offered him a glass of water, which he gratefully accepted because it was a very hot day. Then I took him through the house and into the yard. The lawn was covered with lovely white and yellow dandelions. He took one look and released a deep sigh. There were no noxious weeds. I already knew that because I had previously checked the city's regulations to find out exactly which plants were prohibited. My yard was not merely within compliance, it was nowhere close to being a violation. The officer apologized for wasting my time and said my yard was nowhere near becoming a problem. Then he left my house and went next door to speak with Bob about wasting municipal resources. I stood near my open front door and listened. It was glorious. Bob sputtered angrily, trying to defend himself and portray me as the villain, but the officer was not interested. My wife and I cannot even sit outside and enjoy our backyard because of all those stupid dandelions. The officer told Bob to stop harassing his neighbors and left. Listening to that exchange gave me an idea. I knew Bob enjoyed sitting on his back deck during the afternoon, so I waited. The next time I saw him sitting outside, I walked into my backyard and ignored him while gathering a nice bouquet of white-topped dandelions whose seeds were ready to scatter. A 4-foot chain-link fence separated our properties, so there was almost nothing blocking the view between our yards. I walked over to the fence, made direct eye contact with Bob, and began blowing thousands of dandelion seeds into his yard. The wind was at my back, so the seeds traveled quite far across his lawn. His face turned red and he immediately started shouting. I smiled and said, "What is the problem, Bob? I am just doing what you asked and getting rid of my dandelions." He continued yelling. I ignored him and kept blowing. After sending the seeds from several dandelions into his yard, Bob stormed back inside. From that day forward, for the next several weeks, every single time I saw him sitting on his deck, I went outside and released more dandelion seeds into his lawn. Eventually, dandelion season ended. I would like to say Bob learned an important lesson about bullying and minding his own business. He did not. I may share some of his other attempts at harassing me another time. The next one is an entitled People Story. I work as an engineer. I do some consulting on the side, but typically only for people I know and as a favor. A good friend asked me to help his in-laws who were doing some fairly massive additions. I agreed solely because he asked me to. This is not something I have any interest or need in doing except as a favor. It's an old house and had "can of worms" written all over it with some of the changes they wanted to do. Now he warned me that the MIL can be unpleasant, but that was an understatement. She seemed to think that because I was being paid, I charged probably 1/10 what a business would, that she could snap her fingers at me like a servant. I had a few unpleasant emails with her, but it was tolerable. She was rude when I was pointing out issues with their plans, but nothing too extreme. That changed when I started trying to find a time for me to stop by and inspect a few areas of the house to verify some information. I offered times to stop by on the weekend, but that didn't work for her. Tried evening times, still a no. Nope, she wanted me to stop by during my office work hours because that was best for her. When I told her no, this gets done on the weekends or in the evening, she went from rude to incredibly hostile, telling me that she is paying me, LOL, and that I work with her availability, not the other way around. CC'd my friend in on the chain, told them I was out and to have fun working with whoever they get. Friend apologized, I said no worries, not my problem anymore. She emailed back quite stunned that I was walking away, telling me that it's not how business is conducted. I didn't bother responding. About 3 weeks later, I get an email from the husband now asking me if I would reconsider, and he promises that his wife won't speak to me or be involved in anyway. I hear from my friend that while the quotes came back much higher, which was tolerable for them, but it was how long the wait was. They just bought this house and wanted to move in ASAP, but it's an incredibly busy time of year for the industry. Turns out when companies you reach out to are drowning in work and you have a potentially convoluted and messy project, they aren't chomping at the bit to get your business. So now they are going to lose the trades they lined up because design would be a month or two out. I passed on the request as I struggled to believe she would be kept in check and had no desire to bail her out. My friend didn't care, said it was nice watching her attitude give her consequences that actually affect her. Anyway, thank you for watching.